You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me.
Hello. Nice to be with you. Thanks for joining us. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and it is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. We are a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. So let's get right to it. What I wanted to talk about today is the tendency to ruminate. I, the tendency to obsess over something that happened or something that's been said and to go over it in your mind again and again and again, to wake up at 3 in the morning and to be thinking about this thing and remembering the conversation that happened, remembering things that were said, and then imagining what you could say next time and just ruminating on something that was said or done. And the other thing I want to talk about is what we can do about it, what we can do to break this cycle and to distinguish between unhealthy obsessing and productive reflection. So let me just back up just for a second. There have been many times when I've caught myself in this cycle, when something happened or I've been in a conversation when that exact thing would happen, when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd immediately go to that interaction and go over that encounter again and again in my head. And I'd be thinking about it for days. And I'd be planning how to re-enter the conversation, what I would say next time, how I would navigate, how I would direct the conversation, how I'd win the argument, quite frankly. I'll just give you one example. About 2 years ago, I was one of the last ones to leave it was actually started as a business meeting. And then a bunch of folks left. And after the business meeting, a lot of times a few of us just hang about and just socialize. A lot of us are friends at this. It was a board meeting. And there was one fella in particular that occasionally we get into discussions about politics, but it's a fella that has very strong opinions, but clearly doesn't get the chance to talk about it very often. So for a solid hour plus, I was there and I recognized that my role with this fellow, the first fellow, was simply to let him talk, to let him think through and air his positions and justify his positions. And I wasn't really going back and forth with him. It was, frankly, it was one of the dudes that it was clear that he just had a lot on his mind and he appreciated having someone there to express it to. And we didn't really do much back and forth, but that's okay. Sometimes that's the role that I play for folks, allowing them to express themselves and being there to allow them to be heard. But I was hoping that he would get out most of his thoughts, that he would felt heard and understood. And then at a certain point, I'd be able to share some of my thinking on any number of the topics. There were just a whole list of topics that he covered. And, there were one or two that I felt pretty strongly about that I'd want to kind of clarify what my positions were. There was a third person there that was kind of busy cleaning up, and wasn't, he was piping in here and there, but he was otherwise busy until the very end. And right at the point when I got out maybe half of a sentence of a position that I held, the third person that up until that point was pretty busy and wasn't really participating in the conversation basically labeled me a certain way, and really didn't allow me what I had been waiting for, the opportunity to basically share a response to what this other fella had been saying for the last hour or so, because the person who entered into conversation late, who was occupied cleaning up and doing other stuff up until the very end, he assumed to know what I thought about all those things, and then distilled it down to very oversimplified versions of what he thought my positions were, and then distilled it down even more to basically a label. In this instance, he labeled me as a leftist, or something along those lines. I forget what he called. I think leftist is the term that he used, and I really objected to that on any number of levels, and for any number of reasons. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about, you know, this tendency and specifically what to do about it. But what I will say is that it really set me off. There's a few times I've talked about my struggles with mental health and what I've been trying to do, but there have been moments over the years when something happened where I think of it as my brain broke. And let's just say that that was one of those moments where my brain broke. I really, something that happened there really triggered me, really set me off. I was in a bad place, frankly, just in general that season. But that there was something about waiting all night, putting on, exercising my ability to be understanding, exercising my ability to see a person and hear a person, but also hoping that I'd have an opportunity to express myself and be heard. And then not only was I not heard, not only was I not understood, but a third participant in the conversation, I don't know if projected is exactly the right word, but spoke in a way, spoke for me, but not accurately for me, and then labeled me in clearly what was disparate in his point of view, a very disparaging way, something that was a assigned a label to me that he objected to, that he really disagreed with. So those combination of things, the kind of mental space, mental emotional space I was in general during that season, the events of that specific night, and then being labeled, especially inaccurately, and then being shut off, and not having an opportunity to respond in any way that night, really just, like I said, my brain broke. So that's just it. And to the point of ruminating, I mean, talk about ruminating. This is 2 years, over 2 years ago that this happened. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking about this. So I'm not sitting here saying, I know what this is and I could diagnose it. And here's what I'm saying is I'm working this out. I'm working out for myself. And I'm guessing that a lot of other folks have interactions that they ruminate on, at least for days, if not months and years. And in my case, there have been a couple of instances over the years that I'm still ruminating on. Now, I'd like to evolve to the point where the unhealthy obsessiveness about things is that is not what characterizes my thinking, but a more healthy, contained reflection in order to understand things better, understand my own processes and triggers better. That's all part of it. So, what first of all, if you're watching, if you're listening, I'm curious of instances for you when something happened, you had a conversation, you had an interaction where you obsessed over it for days, weeks, months on end, and went over the conversation in your head to the degree that you weren't even getting past it. I'm curious of other instances like this, like the one that I just described for me, that I didn't just think about that night. I didn't just think about the next day. I thought about for days and weeks. And in some ways, I'm still thinking about it and processing it, but haven't. I guess the reason why it's still unhealthy rumination, the word that I'm using for our purposes today, as opposed to productive reflection, is that I feel that there's still something that I need to work on here. There's still something that I need to understand about myself and about interacting with others a little bit better. So this is what I've come up with. I'm going to share it with you. Again, I'm interested in your feedback on this. I've done a lot of homework on this. I almost hesitate to say I've done my research, because everybody does the Google machine and stuff like that. But no, there's really good resources to help do this in a way that isn't feeding into one's biases. But we all have access to some really good resources. So I've tried to distill some things of what to do about unhealthy rumination, while still allowing for healthy reflection. and then how to just handle these interactions better so as to nurture relationships in a more meaningful way. So, a couple things that I've thought of in terms of prescriptions, it's divided into basically a couple of inward facing solutions, a couple of outward facing solutions. So, the inward first, one is just self awareness. So, what I mean by self awareness is in that the instances that I just described, being self aware, I should be aware enough to know that I was in a particularly vulnerable emotional mental state during that time. So, one needs to sometimes be on guard so as not to put, in that case, myself in harm's way. Even though up until the very end of the night, I was listening, I was hearing, I was understanding, and at the very least, in what I was doing for the one friend, he was being heard and understood, and that's a great thing. Even if I didn't actually get to a point of being able to express my thoughts or response to what he was saying, that I think that would have been cool. But if I was more self-aware, I would have been a little bit more on guard to know that if somebody did something to be aware of one's triggers. In my case, being labeled inaccurately, being disparaged, or being lumped in with a group of people, mischaracterized and generalized by a group of people that are seen in a disparaging light. Things like that would trigger me. What especially being aware, self-aware, what would especially trigger me is if that happened where I felt then a greater need to express myself and to be heard, that not being able to do so would really send me over the edge, which ultimately it did. So just being self-aware of what might trigger you, what might set you off, might put you into this place of rumination, of going into a bad place, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even. So being self-aware, also self-management. So one is I've shared before that a lot of times I'm having a conversation with folks over a whiskey or drinks or wine or something. So self-management sometimes is just that physical intake. If you are in a vulnerable place emotionally or mentally, it might be a night that you choose not to drink, for example. That might be one of them. You might be going on, 3 or 4 hours sleep if you've been ruminating on something else, so you might be a little bit too tired, but self-management. But then it could also be self-management in terms of the aftermath. If it happens, there's a number of things that you could do. I've learned actually that when I catch myself ruminating on something, obsessing over a conversation, that I need to get through the day after. Whatever I do, if I am, texting someone or trying to call someone the night of within an hour, if I really feel that strongly about it, it's not going to go well. Even the next day, certainly not the next morning. And sometimes it takes me into the second day after. So I've learned to live with the disturbance that I have, the inner turmoil that I have. I've learned to reckon with that the first day after and even going into the second day. Because there is, I don't know if everybody's built this way, but I know that I coil around things. My head and my mind, I coil around things. So I need time to uncoil from that interaction. So trying to pick up the conversation within the hour or even the next day, and in some cases, 2 days afterwards, not productive. I need to uncoil from whatever it was that set me off. So that's just a very practical self-management tool that I've learned. Another one I've talked about before. In my case, I do meditate. It's for me, it's not a spiritual practice. I have other spiritual practices like prayer and reading my Bible and going to church and stuff like that. But meditating is a mental practice. Like we go and work out in the gym for physical workouts. Meditation for me is a mental workout. And what I mean by that is there's this practice, and forgive me if I don't have a PhD in this stuff. Read up on Rick Hansen or Tara Brach. There's some great experts in this field of meditation. that have written extensive PhD level folks. In fact, I might put that in the show notes. I'm just going to jot it down right now. Rick Hansen and Tara Brock are really good resources for this, among others, of course. But what I've found is this practice of noting in my meditation, because a lot of folks they eschew meditating altogether because the the word that I get is, but my brain is, it's always going. And so is mine. Before I started meditating, and even when I did start, and to this day, my brain is like a hamster on a hamster wheel. It's always going, going, going. But that's what the practice is. So noting is recognizing that thought and then allowing that thought to pass and then getting back to the focus, which is a lot of times it's simply the breathing. Breathe. And sometimes you have a different focus, like you're listening, you're hearing what's around you in that moment. So there are other things in a meditation that might be the focus. So noting is simply acknowledging a thought, gently acknowledging it, and then also allowing it to pass. And by acknowledging the thought, for me, what I've recognized is I'm acknowledging something that is a separate entity from me. It's just a thought. It's not my reality. It's simply a thought. It is not me. It is not my identity. The thought is not my identity. It's a separate thing that I can then allow to pass. Whereas the illusion, when I'm ruminating, the thought like I said before, the thought begins to coil around my brain in a way. And in some ways, it then becomes my very identity. That thought, that what I'm ruminating on, that disturbance becomes it defines my identity in a way. Whereas the practice of noting the meditation is a practice, is a daily workout. The practice of noting, you're separating yourself from that thought. It's just a separate entity. It's not your very reality. The present is the most real thing in this, for the purposes of the exercise, and allowing the thought to separate from you and then practicing allowing it to pass is very, very helpful. So those are two very practical ways of self-management, inward facing, what to do about rumination. Get through day one, get through day two, let things start to uncoil in their own cycle, at the pace of their own cycle. And then I also, in my case, I do meditate and use the practice of noting thoughts and allowing them to pass. So it's a good practice. And in one of Rick Hansen's books, excuse me, in one of Rick's books, Buddha's Brain, I think that's the one. He describes they're like neuroconnectors, like your brain is made up of these, oh gosh, I wish I had the right technical words for it, but it's like neural processes. And you're literally changing which connectors are connecting to each other. You're literally changing your brain. So it could be a very healthy process for those who do struggle with different forms of mental illness, or just, disturbances of your mental state, even if it's not technically an illness, such as ruminating. Perfectly mentally healthy people can sometimes ruminate. So those are a couple things. Now, there's also what to do about it is outward facing. A couple of ways of thinking what to do about rumination. One is social awareness. When I'm in a conversation with someone, it might not be me who's being disturbed, but if I'm talking to someone and I see that the pace of the way they're talking is increased, their volume gets increased, they get more impassioned in their gestures, that their breathing gets shallower, that they're expressing inner turmoil, inner disturbance, I might take my foot off the gas pedal. I might then not insist on my point being heard. I might allow them a little bit of space, a little bit of time to express themselves and to, in my case, practice hearing them, practice understanding them. People know when they're being seen as a human being, when they're being heard and they're being understood. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with someone who's making, let's say, a ridiculous point. I've had interactions, I've described it on this show. I've had interactions with people who are absolutely convinced the 2020 election was stolen. I do not need to acknowledge the merits of that that theory. I don't need to affirm the merits of that conspiracy, but I can still see that human being. I can still see why. I can still see them as another human being, as much as I disagree with, say, the premise of what they're arguing. And frankly, it could be pretty predictable. I might push back. We might be talking about the subject in a very analytical way, and I could talk about the 60 plus cases that the Trump campaign brought up or something along those lines. But that might upset the person because maybe the world within which they travel, the circles that they speak to others about this, or the content that they're digesting all affirms that particular conspiracy theory. It doesn't have to be that one or any number of other things that I've found to be not connected to reality. And even just me saying it like that, it could, certain people it might really disturb them. So social awareness is me recognizing that in the moment and doing my part to not affirm the merits of the point they're making, especially if I disagree with it. In some cases, I might be persuaded, but in a lot of cases, my reaction to whatever point they're making might have triggered something in them. So then for me to switch gears and say, this person just needs to be heard and understood. Even if I still disagree with what they're saying, I can still say, wow, I understand. I now understand why that's so important to you. I understand what got you to the place where where you were reacting to a whole other set of circumstances, or what a group other people were saying, and that you're responding to what. Just find something to understand about them to affirm their humanity, and to make them feel heard and understood. If nothing else, heard and understood. Find the humanity in them. So, but the key in this is when you're the problem of rumination, the problem of obsessive thinking, you can take part in that by being socially aware of the people that you're talking to, and when they're being triggered and going into something, and what you can do in that moment. And what that also does is it helps with the second part of the second bullet point, if you will, an outward facing management of rumination, and that's relationship management. The question is, we talked about this a few weeks ago, do you want to win or do you want the relationship? Now, sometimes it might be just a very transactional interaction. The person might not mean anything to you, so you might just indulge your desire to, deliver a real good stinger. And that's fine. Like, listen, I'm certainly, I've certainly been accused of such shenanigans. So I'm certainly not above it, but in most cases, I'm still not at the point where I'm interacting with a lot of people that I don't have a relationship with, or have the beginnings of a relationship or the potential of a relationship with. I'm not going too deep into when someone comments on one of the YouTube videos or something. I'm usually not going too deep into a thread with somebody that I don't know. I don't have some frame of reference for who they are. There was one here recently, someone piped up on a video that my pastor put up of just actually, he'll be coming on the show. Pastor Matt Colwell will be coming on the show. But I did a back and forth with somebody that commented on one of his videos about the church's policy if ICE were to come to our church. And we will be talking about this, so you'll see this soon, my conversation with Matt. But there was somebody who was just saying some of the most hateful things, generalizations, mischaracterizations, vilifications. And those are definitely triggers of mine. So I did maybe two back and forths with him, and I realized this person doesn't know me. I don't know this person. They're clearly not putting their best foot forward, and they're really not interested in having a meaningful dialogue and meaningful conversation. They were clearly there for no reason but to contend with folks who disagreed with him in any way. So I just decided to shut it down. But that's really the exception to the rule. Usually I don't even comment or reply to someone that I don't know. So again, if you restrict your conversations to people that you either already have a relationship with or have the potential of a relationship with, you have to ask the question, do you want to win the conversation or do you want that relationship? And then if you if it's the former, if you want to win, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But then are you really winning? Like, what actually are you winning? Those, I have a whole other set of questions. If you answer, and I would appreciate the candor. I would appreciate the honesty. If you said, yeah, I want to win. But then I'm asking, what are you really winning? And are you really winning? So that's a whole other set of questions. The other thing in terms of relationship management is to seek to see the person, hear the person, as a human being, even if we still disagree, like I was describing a second ago. And then if we decide on the latter, do you want the relationship? I think there's always an opportunity to identify what concerns the person has, what values the person has. Even if our prescriptions, like in terms of legislation and propositions or Supreme Court cases, whatever it is, or candidates that we support, even if our prescriptions of what we're supporting are different, my guess is that a lot of people's values have a lot of overlap. A lot of people's what we're concerned about has a lot of overlap. Or at the very least, if somebody says, my greatest concern is that, how many people are here without legal documentation, they would say it differently, all the illegals, right? And I have friends that talk that way. And I could just be candid with them and say, listen, that is not a concern of mine. I really have no concern about the level of immigration, flow in, flow out, what have you. It's just not I'm not judging you for having that concern. I'm not saying it's illegitimate. It's just not a concern of mine. So at the very least, let's not judge each other. You happen to be more concerned about it. I happen to be less concerned about it. But at least we understand and are not judging each other for having those legitimate concerns or lack thereof. So understanding each other's, if not sharing values and concerns, my guess is that we do have shared values and concerns, but at least understanding each other's values and concerns without judging that order of priorities. And then the biggest thing I've alluded to this and mentioned it already a couple times here, but a big thing for me is avoid labeling. In terms of relationship management, how big of a deal it is for me and how much that has set me off in the past when somebody labels me, especially if they're inaccurately labeling me, if they're mischaracterizing me and my views by generalizations and vilifications by associations, like the guy calling me a leftist. I guess if I was, maybe I wouldn't object to it. If I was, I would still, I think I might still be upset by it because I don't need you to label me. I just want to be understood in all the complexity. I want to be seen as a human being, not as some label. I don't want to be reduced down to he's a Met fan, he's a leftist, because I am a Met fan, freaking diehard. But that if you reduce me down to Met fan, it's like somebody just recently commented on the notion that I couldn't possibly be a Christian because I've lived in the New York area and the L area my entire life. Couldn't possibly be a Christian. That is like that's just dumb. That's just a dumb comment. Talk about reductionist. I couldn't possibly be a Christian because I grew up in Jersey and have lived in LA. Like that's just flat out dumb. I don't know if the person is dumb, but it was a really dumb freaking comment and a reductionist comment. So avoid the labeling. You want the relationship? Avoid the labeling. Allow the person to define themselves and use the superpower of curiosity and draw that person out of themselves. And they will feel heard. They will feel understood. They will feel loved. They will, in fact, feel loved by you by asking them the questions to bring them out of themselves. And then you are enriched by it because you have a better understanding of a person in all of their complexity. And it enhances a relationship between two people as opposed to creating distance by labeling them for them and telling them what they are. You're not hearing a person, understanding a person. You're distancing that person by oftentimes labeling them, mischaracterizing by generalizations and vilifications by the wrong associations. A lot of Asians in there, but I think you understand what I mean. Now, there are some caveats here. I can only control my own actions and reactions, not those of others. So I can set I can express myself and say, hey, the way that you're labeling me is really upsetting. So I can control my actions. I can make my what is disturbing me very clear. But I can't at the end of the day control this person from labeling me. I can't control what they say behind closed doors, behind my back, let alone what they say to me. So I can't control that, but I can control my own actions and reactions to them. So then the question is, how can I enhance the possibility of more healthy communication? And I think the most important way is to model a better way. Controlling my own actions means if I want to be heard and understood, I can practice hearing and understanding and seeing someone as a human being. When I do that, I'm creating the environment to be heard and understood. Now, again, I can't control whether they take the time to do that, but if I start doing it, if I start modeling it, it creates an environment where it's more likely, more friendly, more open to the possibility of me being heard as well. I can also clarify what I hope to get out of this, or I can clarify my boundaries. If I tell a person, look, this is what's happened a few times in the past and it's been really disturbing to me. And I'm going to ask you a favor. If you get to the point of talking about me or an endeavor or another person that I really care about in a disparaging way, the rest of the conversation isn't going to go well. So I'm going to ask you to recognize when that's happening, recognize when you're about to do that, when you're about to criticize me, another person I care about, or an endeavor I care about. I'm just going to ask you to recognize, if you can, I'm going to ask you to recognize when that's happening so that it doesn't happen. Because then this conversation, it's not going to be a conversation anymore. I'm just going to have to cut it off. I'm not equipped. It upsets me to the point that I am not equipped to then have a productive conversation about anything else. So I'm just putting that out there. I'll explain that to someone. I'll express and define my boundaries and ask as a favor to respect those boundaries. And if that person is incapable of it or refuses to abide by it, okay, that's their prerogative. I can only control my actions and reactions and not the actions and decisions of others. And if they do insist on it, if they take that vulnerability, if I share a vulnerability with them and they specifically choose to step on that and use it as sort of now they have a weapon to use against me, then then know something. Then that oftentimes means that's a relationship that I don't want, or at the very least, it's a relationship where I can do what we've talked about before. All right, I'm gonna love you, but I'm gonna love you from a safe distance. I'm gonna love you from way over there, right? That's sometimes you just have to love them from far away. So yeah, when somebody, I guess this is coming up a lot for me. So maybe this is the thing when somebody insists on labeling, generalizing, mischaracterizing, and vilifying me, someone I care about, or an endeavor that I care about. Those are definitely triggers for me. I can express that. I can make that clear. I can set that as a boundary. And if someone chooses to ignore that or use that as a way to, as a weapon, as a rhetorical weapon, then I'll know I'll know that that is not a relationship that I want, or at the very least, it's a relationship that I will have to keep at a safe distance. So, so that's a lot. Gosh, I always end up doing this. Always end up talking, getting deeper into a subject that's been on my mind and going a little bit longer. So I appreciate you bearing with me. I just wanted to talk about that tendency to ruminate, the tendency when something happens, a conversation happens, the tendency to obsess over something, and to go over it in our heads, but not to the point of dwelling on it, but not to the point of thinking clearly so as to figure out how to move forward and to grow, either as oneself and mentally, emotionally, become emotionally more mature, gain emotional intelligence, or to nurture a relationship. So, rumination versus healthy reflection. And I just wanted to, I wanted to understand it for myself, and I figured I'd share what I've been thinking through with you, and then what to do about it. It's the inward and the outward. self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. It really comes down to that. I'd be really interested if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, I'd be really interested in your thoughts if you've had experiences like this and to hear your prescriptions, what you do to separate between healthy reflection versus unhealthy obsessiveness or rumination, what you do about it, how to move forward. So that's all I got today. As always, if you dig what we're doing, remember to follow the show, write that review, and now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/at politics and religion. It's youtube.com/at politics and religion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan, at COREYS as in Sam, NATHAN, at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials, including Substack. We have those links in the show notes. Your support really does make a difference, so thank you for all of it. Now, go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.